Alright, everyone, welcome back. This is going to be part 2 of my introduction to QAnon series. The first one, I just kind of described what QAnon is and gave 3 main sources of evidences that something is indeed happening in the real world. In this one, I'm probably going to reiterate about QAnon and describe who it is, and then go into how he's established credibility from the beginning. So, you know, kind of as a taste for what you can find if you actually, you know, dive into it yourself, into the research and into the posts and so forth. So anyways, what QAnon is an information dissemination program run by military operations in the U.S. military, at least. I'm not sure if they have any connections to any other militaries across the world. I would imagine they do, or at least they're giving information and operating with them, because the operation involves a global eradication of the cabal of influencers that pull the strings. They create all of the false wars in the world that create many of the diseases and the famines, and control a lot of the sex trafficking in the world. So who is QAnon? That's a big question a lot of people get hung up on, especially in the mainstream media. They like to talk about who is QAnon. They'll sometimes pin it on one person who wants to be famous for a bit. But QAnon isn't any one person. QAnon, well, Q60, the 60th post said that the number of people who have the full picture can be counted on 2 hands. That means that it's less than or equal to 10. He also says that only 3 are non-military. So that gives us an idea of how much of this is a military operation. That means, I don't want to do the math right now, but it gives you an idea. Only 3 of the 6 to 10 are non-military. So that means 3 to 6 are military, if I did that right. Another big factor is that Q514 made it very clear that going forward not going forward, that there would be no outside communications. Anything anyone that is claiming they've had direct communications with QAnon outside of the image boards should be immediately called fake news. They're not real. They are lying. And with that gives us, you know, a really good idea of, well, that we should only be trusting the posts. Anything that's saying they are QAnon outside of the boards is not. That's not to say they don't operate, but or you know, that you know what I'm saying. Anyways, moving on. So we actually genuinely don't know who is a part of this information dissemination program, and this is actually very advantageous to the program, because it keeps the enemies of this program on their toes. They don't know who to trust, which is good. That means they'll make mistakes. Also, it protects the operators from people that would do them harm to try to prevent them in acting on this. Now, that's not to say these people are not vulnerable. You know, the cabal has their own surveillance techniques and operations, and there, I'm sure, have been and will be casualties of operators in this program, and they will never be known, and it's more safe that way. It's important that it stays that way. So yeah, and part of why it keeps their enemies on their toes is that because QAnon also uses disinformation. One of his early posts said disinformation is necessary, and the reason this is necessary is because with the disinformation, the people they're trying to expose will make mistakes, and it will further expose them. So we have to keep this in mind. There are some things QAnon has said that would come to light that didn't very early on. He said that he gave a few dates about Hillary Clinton and the Podestas being arrested on a certain date, and they were not. However, this did not give the year that they'd be arrested, so it may be a future date. Or another, I think, more compelling argument is that they were arrested in secret, and they have been tracked and monitored. That's another possibility. I don't know for sure, but it's important to keep an open mind about these things because, until the very end plays out and it all comes to light, we are in the dark on this end, and it's important it stays that way for obvious reasons. So that's kind of the who. The who is really hard to figure out. One major point is to say that President Trump is a part of this. For sure, essentially. There have been many proofs or coincidences that involve Donald Trump and his Twitter. I'll be going over those, hopefully, in these videos. Let's see. So how has QAnon established credibility? This is a very important question because why should we pay any attention to this if it's just some dude on the internet? Or, they have to establish some sort of credibility, either predicting real-world events or giving us information. So very early on, QAnon was just asking a lot of questions, a lot of them pertaining to Saudi Arabia, and to, asking about the money that comes from Saudi Arabia to, like, the Clinton Foundation, to the McCain Institute, and also to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. It's important to understand, if I haven't said this already, that this is not a Republican and Democrat thing. This is, there are corrupt individuals on both sides of the aisles, and actually John McCain is one of the worst of them. And there's some really interesting proofs about John McCain and his demise. Let's just leave it at that at this point. There was a lot of speculation on his wearing of a boot. It changed legs. So if it was a boot that was for broken ankle, it seemed that the broken ankle changed, which is interesting. But also a prediction of the day, time, and hour, and I think minute as well, of his death, which is very strange. So that's one instance of credibility, a more recent one, but I want to go to the very beginning of Saudi Arabia. Because very early on, QAnon was also outlining why a mass arrest event had to be conducted by the military. And this is because a lot of these crimes are beyond the jurisdiction of civil courts. And also you have to understand that the judges in many of the court systems have been compromised. I spoke in the last video about blackmail, and I'm not, I can't say for sure which individuals are compromised and which are not, but the blackmail is vast, very vast. And so he was describing a purge of corrupt officials in governments and in the private sector, people who have committed crimes against humanity, also in the government. And why it has to, one, happen by the military, because they have to conduct military tribunals. For some of these, it's very, very sensitive information, and if it were to come to light in a public civil trial, it would cause, there would be immediate declarations of war, because some of these things involve espionage and a lot of things that our foreign allies may not take too kind to. So it's very important that the military handles this so that the things that need to stay secret stay secret. And let's see, on I think November 4th, 2017, this is very shortly after the about a month after, I'd say, of the Las Vegas shooting. And there's a lot of really interesting information you can find on that. But on November 4th, martial law was declared in Saudi Arabia. And QAnon in Q70 pointed this out the day it happened, and talked about the money in U.S. politics, like I said. And so he was pretty much outlining how the purge would happen in America. I should stop saying purge. I feel like that has a very violent connotation. The mass arrest event happened in Saudi Arabia, as he was outlining how it would happen in the United States. Now, a lot of people assumed this would happen very quickly, but it didn't end up happening because they had to set the stage. But what I found really interesting is that he seemed to be talking about this from a very knowledgeable standpoint. There wasn't any foresight prediction in this one, but essentially this mass arrest of Saudi corruption was a clear precursor of what is predicted to happen in the United States, and then in Europe and Asia. It is essentially a dominoes effect. And if you know about Saudi Arabia and the kind of part they play in human trafficking, they have a lot of money that comes from oil, but also from sex trafficking as well. There's a lot of rich people in their government that enjoy a lot of really particular things. And essentially this was a precursor to how they're going to return power and wealth to the people, because these government officials were removed from power, and then all of their wealth and assets were frozen, taken back, and, given back to the people. So this was, the first kind of interesting thing. I at this point, I don't think I bought it, fully, but going back, this is the first major event QAnon was talking about that pertains to this worldwide operation that's going on. And QAnon is the information dissemination of this operation, not the operation itself. It's an important distinction. It's subtle, but it's important. Now, number 2 has to do with North Korea. In this one, it did have a prediction. Let's see. In Q29, very early on in the Q posts, he was talking about, pretty much telling a story of North Korea, and pretty much alluded to the fact that North Korea is not actually directly run by the Kim dynasty, that they are merely the puppet that's been installed. And, you can kind of assume and fill in the blanks of who that might be. But let's see, Q888 on March 8th posted, said, "Thank you, Kim. Deal made. Clowns out. Strings cut. We took control. I ran next." Which essentially means that whoever was pulling the strings in North Korea had suddenly lost their power. I think in the Q posts, the implication is that the clowns in America, let's just put it that way, I don't want to trigger any algorithms, we're pulling this as pulling the strings in North Korea. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense for them to hold the power of a nuclear not superpower, but a nuclear threat that is essentially scaring everyone in the United States into believing the media and whatever. I mean, and don't you think it was really strange how after Obama left office and Trump became the president, that suddenly North Korea is able to miniaturize nuclear weapons, and suddenly the threat of nuclear war is on everybody's mind. So March 8th is when QAnon says, strings are cut, deal's been made, pretty much welcome aboard. And then 3 months later, we have on June 12th, the Korea Summit, where they are essentially making peace talks. They're talking about not necessarily reintegrating with South Korea, but having peace on the Korean Peninsula, which has been a war for at least, I think, 60 years. An incredible amount of time. A very long war has just been ended, and it was actually predicted 3 months prior by QAnon, which establishes the credibility that they are a part of the military intelligence operations that are working with the president. This is an historic accomplishment. They are denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. North Korea was attending the Olympics that year. They had the remains of prisoners of war from the Korean War are being returned to the United States. That may not seem like a big deal to a lot of civilian people, but to military people who are involved in the military, that's a very big deal. And peace has returned just as predicted, and that was a really big, if I didn't have any credibility in it before, this was a big boost in credibility. Let's see. In Q1464, he said dark to light. Hold up. Dark to light, black, in the post. And this was June 3rd. This post was made, and then June 12th, in the video, it says, out of darkness can come the light. So it's another marker that they're part, whoever's running this QAnon information dissemination is part of the peace building efforts in North Korea. They're trying to cut the strings of the people that are running this war campaign. Let's see, my battery is about to die, so I'm going to wrap this up. But those are just two of the main big events that are in mainstream news that you can look at that QAnon has either talked about or outright predicted. This is going to be important because in the next video I have 10 coincidences or proof that that give QAnon credibility as a legitimate military operation that is running with the President of the United States. So I'm gonna try to do some editing on this. It's very tricky. I don't have it's very tricky. Let's just leave it at that. I'm going to try to edit it in YouTube or something. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you find this informative and interesting. And yeah, we're going to keep going. These 10 proofs I'm going to come with really make it hard to say that President Trump isn't working with this information dissemination program. And yeah, so I wish you all the best.